A question I've been getting a lot lately is how do you hold your watercolor brush? So in today's video, we're going to talk about the different ways you can hold your watercolor brush to get the types of strokes you want. So first, let's talk about it. This is a round watercolor brush, and here at the bottom, this is called the ferrule. Now, my fingers are either going to be on the ferrule or way far away from the ferrule, depending on how I want to hold the brush and what strokes I'm wanting to create. Before we talk about strokes, I'm going to show you how I hold the brush. I use my pointer finger and my thumb to grip the brush at an equal level, and then my middle finger is lower than both of those fingers, and I use it to guide my brush to create the strokes. Now, this location on the brush is a pretty general, comfortable position for me. This is where I usually am. It's not too high on the brush. I'm barely touching the ferrule with my middle finger, and I'm able to make these big sweeping strokes without any issue. But when we do smaller strokes, we can actually move our entire position down towards the bottom of the ferrule, closer to the bristles, to create more of these very tight, detailed strokes. If I move my finger back very far away from the ferrule, it is a lot harder to get those tight, detailed strokes in a very precise manner. It's a little bit more loose the farther back you hold your brush. Now let me show you this from a different angle. I am again holding my brush with my pointer finger and my thumb, and I'm a little bit farther down on the ferrule, but I'm using my middle finger to help guide the brush. So my middle finger guides the shape of the strokes, while my wrist guides the length of the strokes. So when I'm making the stroke, I can create the shape with my middle finger, and then my wrist moves across the paper and determines the length. When I'm doing these shorter line strokes with the tip of the brush, my middle finger is again guiding the brush to create the strokes, while my wrist is what is moving me across the paper. When I want to create these strokes straight across, my middle finger just stays tight against the ferrule. And here's a different angle of what I showed before. My fingers are very close to the edge of the ferrule, to the bristles, and I'm able to get these very tiny, detailed strokes. But when I am high up, away from the ferrule, it is hard to get consistent, detailed strokes. It makes them a lot more loose, which sometimes we want in our smaller strokes. Now let's talk about the angle. You can see that this brush is at an angle to the paper. It is not straight up and down, and I'm able to get bigger, wider strokes. When I use the same hand positioning, but have my brush tilted all the way up, this is when I'm using the tip of my brush for tinier, more detailed strokes, and not typically when I'm using the body of the brush. It's a lot easier to use the body of the brush at an angle to the side or even pointed downward, which you'll see in the example where I paint the desert in just a little bit. In the end, you can hold your brush however is most comfortable to you, but when I hold my brush in this grip, I am able to very easily position my brush side to side, up and down, and slide it down the ferrule and away from the ferrule. So this is just an easy way for beginners to learn how to move up and down their brush and get a lot more comfortable with the strokes they want to create. Now I wanted to paint a desert scene and see the different brush strokes and brush angles that I am using without really thinking about it and kind of analyze it back while I'm talking to you. So this angle is pretty flat to the paper. I am still using my classic grip, but because I am higher and away from the ferrule, I'm able to do this really loose stroke that creates this really wonky edge that is representing the red mountains in this desert. Using this angle where we're pretty flat and down to the paper, we are able to use the tip of the brush to create a very specific edge and a line while also using the body of the brush to create bulk. So I'm able to kind of paint in these mountains kind of heavy with the body of my brush, but also using the edge to guide and create the shape as I'm going. Now I'm going to pick up some yellow, and I'm using that same angle and that same kind of stroke where I'm using the tip of my brush to guide the strokes that I'm trying to create, because I'm trying to leave white space and create texture and movement within the landscape. So the tip of my brush is creating this tinier stroke, but I do want the body of my brush to create fullness within that stroke as well. So I do use this angle a lot when I am painting landscapes. And then you'll notice that as I add in the details, my brush angles more upward because I'm using the tip of the brush more, and I am down closer to the ferrule to get more detailed and precise strokes. I actually went to school for dental hygiene, and we were taught very thoroughly how to hold our instruments. Dental hygienists clean teeth, and we use very sharp instruments that go under people's gums, and you have to hold them at the right angle, and you also have to use them in the precise way, not with your fingers as much and mostly with your wrist, so that you're not cutting people, but that also you don't get carpal tunnel. So I think some of the habits that I have that really help me with how I hold my brush, how I manipulate the brush to get it to do what I want, come from that. So I don't know if this is typical with what most artists do, but I have had a lot of questions recently about how I hold my brush and why I hold it the way that I do. And I feel like if you want more control, you just need to hold it closer to the bristles. If you want a little bit looser feel, hold it farther away. And then it's the angles. I think the angles really make a big difference. Depending on what you're painting, you could be almost flat to the paper and completely angled to one side, or completely straight up and down. So again, it's also personal preference. Everybody paints differently. Everybody has a different comfort level with their hands and how they even hold a pencil. How you hold a pencil is going to be a big factor in how you're holding your paintbrush as well. So don't panic if you don't do this, but this is just what I've found is the easiest way to get the brush to manipulate to do what you want it to do and to improve your strokes. How I painted the sky for this desert is a great example of switching between strokes depending on what you need. I am using my fingers closer to the bristles, and my paintbrush is pointing straight up when I am doing the more detailed stroke around the mountains. But then when I am painting the broader strokes around the vastness of the sky, I am more angled to the side and I am farther down on the brush because I don't have to be detailed. The strokes can be bigger and looser. Now I wanted to paint more of an object versus a landscape so I can show you how I hold my brush when I am painting that. So I decided to paint a tree, and I am using my fingers way closer to the bristles than I did on the landscape, and I am using the point and the tip of the brush, and so my paintbrush is angled very high upward at the beginning. And then because I am doing these very detailed strokes that are kind of splaying out from side to side, my fingers stay pretty close to the bristles and far up on the ferrule. Now, I am starting to get farther and farther down away from the ferrule the more I am getting bigger and bigger strokes. So it's kind of fun to see how I start really close to the bristles, and then as I get farther and farther down the tree, I start loosening my grip just a bit. And as I'm painting these things, it might seem really obvious to you, but I think it's a really good refresher because sometimes we hold our brush in a way that makes it more complicated to get the strokes that we want. So for anyone who is a beginner, it's really nice to realize that the way you hold your brush is actually determining how your strokes look. So as I hold my brush to the side or upward, or how far down on my brush closer to the bristles, more on the ferrule I am, it's going to give me a completely different look. I have seen artists who hold their brush very far away from the ferrule, and it's because they desire the looseness that less control gives them and gives their paintings. So if you want more detailed, hard lines that are exact, you're going to hold your brush closer. If you want the looseness that's more spontaneous, you're going to hold your brush way farther away from the ferrule. Now you can see even as I paint these tiny birds, I'm pretty much as close to the bristles as you can get, but that kind of detail is almost impossible unless your fingers are this close. Thank you so much for being here and watching this video today. I hope this was helpful for you, especially if you're a beginner, but I think all artists can use a refresher on the best ways to hold their brushes so that we can be using our brushes in a way that serves us and doesn't make us frustrated. I will see you all next time. Bye.